Welcome to ICT on PNC. This is where we get the big minds in insurance and from the Insurance Council of Texas with the occasional special guest to talk about the issues that are impacting the PNC insurance industry here in Texas. Today it is all about auto insurance and the bills that are making their way through the legislature right now, and some of the challenges that we're looking at with these bills and the differences between some of the bills that look similar. Also dispel some of the rumors that are out there about what these actual bills mean and what they're trying to accomplish. So today we're going to talk about some of the things that are going on with OEM, which is original equipment manufacturer, and some of the things that people are trying to fit into these bills where dictating whether insurance companies use certain parts or, and so we're going to dispel some of the rumors around that, as well as some of the challenges with appraisals. And again, this is dispelling some of the rumors that are out there about appraisals and the challenges, the supposed challenges that consumers are having with appraisals after they are in an accident. So today we have Angie Cervantes, who is the government relations manager here at ICT, and Albert Betts, our executive director, and they're going to walk us through the challenges of the auto bills and auto legislation that we have in. Welcome today, and I'm just going to let you guys jump right in and kick us off.
Okay, thank you, Rich, for that introduction. Hi, Angie. How are you?
Hello, good morning.
Good. We are going to talk about, here's our first bad pun of the day, talk about what's driving the auto legislation and discussion this 88th session. So multiple bills, a lot of different concepts. A lot of these concepts are repeats from prior sessions, and some of them are interesting in their approach. And I think we're also going to cover some of the background of how we got here in these auto debates, auto proposals, some of the rhetoric being used, some of the misinformation, that's probably putting it politely, that we're seeing regarding auto repair and auto repair processes. So, Angie, what's your 1-2 sentence take on what the auto repair bills look like this session?
Auto repair bills look like this session. Well, they are a little different than last session, but the same approach. We're seeing bills that are just trying to restrict the insurer and ultimately consumers, I think, ability to choose where they get their parts or repair their vehicles. So we've got a couple out there. We've got one that's a refile that we've seen multiple times, and then one that's a slightly different approach, variation from a bill from last session, which I guess, like you said, we could take it back to last session and kind of how that debate formed and where we are today.
I think you can probably take it back 2 or 3 sessions. Some of these, it's been an ongoing issue, and I think our audience knows auto is the biggest line of insurance in the state. I think there's 29 million auto policies out there in Texas.
Yes.
And for those writing auto, this is a particular interest because we've had such a rough couple of years in terms of losses in the auto industry. That's probably a different podcast discussion, but with increasing severity, increasing frequency of accidents, cars are more expensive, the inflationary pressures, a lot of attention to auto as companies, do their best to stay profitable but also be there to repair and take care of claims. So,
and I think that is a topic for another time, but it is really important in context with these bills because, if parts are restricted, we're already seeing backup in the supply chain and being able to access things for repair. So it's all interconnected.
Exactly. Yeah. It's speaking of interconnection. Let's go back pre-session because we're talking about this session. But there's some things that went on last year that started that gave us a preview of what was going to happen this session. And in particular, Angie, you may recall, I think it was spring of 2022, that we noticed an effort by the ABAT, the Auto Body Association of Texas, to encourage, I almost would say solicit, complaints about repairs that had been made. They had a form online that people could fill out, that you were encouraged to fill out with a list of, I won't go through all of them, but a list of supposed complaints, some of which was, I didn't get an OEM part in my vehicle, which is not required by law. And so as we looked at that, you may recall, it seemed to be one, generating complaints on things that weren't legitimate repair complaints, but two, there were stories that when carriers talked to their insured, turns out that policyholder, that insured, had not actually filed the complaint. There are examples of those complaints being filed by the body shop or the website. And so the industry gathered together. We wrote a letter to TDI to point out the problems with this, but that gave us a preview of what was coming. It was going to be a full-on press to get something passed. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think that letter, those complaint forms, or online complaint processes, even said, we're going to send this to your legislature, or we urge you to send this to your state rep and your state senator to help generate this legislative push. So we knew something was coming. We knew it was going to be a big push involving OEM parts, repair process complaints, a slew of just issues designed to generate some talking points for the 8-day session. Was there other things that we saw coming in the interim that gave us a clue we were about to have a big discussion about auto repair and auto processes?
Auto processes. And I think it was maybe the ABAT letter, those complaints that spurred, there were interim hearings on the issue of auto appraisal and just whether or not it should be required or not, and what consumers, I guess, what do consumers have as far as remedies go for auto repair. And so that was something that came to light during a House insurance hearing, I guess during the interim. And that also stemmed from some, I think, not confusion, but some information about what kinds of policies are available and what's available with appraisal. And I think that process also got jumbled up with the auto repair and that aspect of this argument.
Yeah, I think you're being nice by calling it confusion and jumbled up, because literally at the hearing, as I recall, there was testimony to the effect that claims just aren't paid. They aren't
Right.
settled. That, if you took away the right, and no one was taking this away, but if you took away the right to appraisal in what I'll call the routine non-total loss situations, consumers would be without remedies, and that just wasn't happening. And that was against the backdrop of a question about a company filing an endorsement to limit appraisal to only total loss situations, which was already approved in Texas by the Department of Insurance. So a lot of jumbled up is a good way of putting it. A lot of jumbled up alternate facts and stories about what was happening. So the groundwork was laid pre-session to come in and talk about appraisal didn't work, and policyholders, consumers are doing without, and that there need to be some changes made to the auto process. Plus, you had this notion of OEM parts being the only parts that could be used to repair a vehicle, which was interesting to me since all my life, and I've had teenage children driving and wrecking cars, and I don't recall OEM parts being needed to repair their vehicles, and I'm thankful that there were not OEM parts required, because those repairs were expensive. But so against that backdrop, we get in the session, we knew this was coming, and we just have quite a few bills. We'll talk about that now, kind of what the legislation intends to do, or at least looks like it proposes to do. And then some of the concerns about the legislation as proposed, and as we're recording this podcast, none of those bills have been heard yet, but we know it's coming at some point during the session. So against that background, against sort of the how did we get here, let's, I guess, probably talk about the most prominent bill out there, which is Senate Bill 1083, which is what we call the OEM parts bill. This is a repeat from last session. And generally, what does that bill try to do, Andrew?
So this bill, and as you mentioned, it's a repeat of last session. And last session, the bill was a push from the Automobile Dealers Association. And last session, what it did was it tried to restrict the repair process and also parts just to OEM for new vehicles. And it talked about it being a void of the warranty if that were to happen. So this session, there's a little bit of a different approach, but it's still the bill. What it tries to do is if your car is, I think it says 36 months, or if you have a new car, that would prohibit insurers from being able to use something that's not an OEM part or an OEM repair process, which is, I think, that a term that we've talked about. There's really not a definition, and that would essentially, I guess, lead to car dealership repair. It seems like what it would be. So, and then it would also prevent insurers from giving recommendations for body shops, which is already prohibited in the law. So,
yeah,
a little bit of a different approach, same end goal, I guess.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the notion that somehow requiring OEM parts will help consumers, because you're right. It as it talks about repair processes and OEM parts, you probably mean you're going to have to go to a dealership or manufacturer-owned repair shop to get anything done. So this would seem to harm the independent body shops out there who work. Even some of the chain shops might get harmed by this because they don't have an OEM repair process, whatever that is. I think that's one of the questions. What does that mean? But also just limiting consumer choice in repair. And we have a couple of bills out there that have that last notion you mentioned, which is, insurers cannot direct where repairs occur, and they can't right now under the law. Insurers, again, having had children with multiple accidents, very familiar with the process, not only legally but also just in reality, which is you get a list of shops. Your insurer says here's our list, but and they always, every time I've encountered this, they've always pointed out you're free to go where you want to go, but here's a list of shops that we have, and so it's interesting to see that notion perpetuated in bills that consumers don't have that choice already, in bills that seem to be limiting that choice to companies or repair shops that are OEM only and OEM repair process as well. This would be interesting to see how this goes this session. On the last session, you remember, I think it was May 5th, and I may be a day or two off on the date of 2021, a report came out from the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, that basically, in a nutshell, and I know you can probably describe it better than I can, but in a nutshell, just says the use of OEM parts, there's no evidence to support that's needed, is actually harmful to consumers. It does not void warranties, which was part of the argument last session, and that particularly for those of lower income, it was particularly harmful because it was likely to increase repair costs and increase auto rates. So if you remember anything else about that FTC report, is there anything I forgot? But that's generally what I remember. It basically said.
I think that was the crux of it, and the timing of it just happened to coincide when this bill was making its way. It had passed the Senate pretty quickly, and it was making its way to the House, and so it put the brakes, I guess, another auto reference.
There's another pun.
Brakes on the bill, yeah.
And what about the other bill out there? in the House this time, in House Bill 1321, which also deals with OEM parts and repairs.
Right. And this bill is a Representative Clardy has filed this bill multiple sessions, and it has not really gone anywhere, but it does always get filed, and that one takes a more, I think, straightforward, I guess, approach to prohibit an insurer from using non-OEM parts.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit, you're right, a little bit different approach, because it actually says you can't, in doing repairs, consider a part to be of like kind and quality as an OEM part. So it seems
and like
to
kind
ban,
of quantity is what is in statute right now.
right. So it
Right.
seems to just do away with anything that's not OEM, although not directly stating that. And then an interesting piece of that is it prohibits the use of the least expensive part, which again is interesting, because whether it's the least expensive or not, if it's the right part, you assume that's what you'd want to have placed in the vehicle. But it's an interesting bill. You're right. This is probably the second, third, maybe fourth version of it. It also talks about prohibiting the use of non-OEM repair processes. Again, no, it's not real clear what that means, but this would have some of the same effects as Senate Bill 1083, the OEM bill that we talked about earlier. So it bears watching what this does if either one of them passes, and then what it does to repair cost choice, what it does to the repair shops themselves in terms of who can and who can't make those repairs. So I think it's just something, obviously, the auto riders are keeping a close eye on, and expect a lot of discussion as this bill comes up in the Senate, where it has support from leadership, and we'll see what happens to it in the Senate as well as the House. So that's kind of the repair bills in a nutshell. I don't know if what happens if anybody's able to put the brakes on them, so to speak. Or what's actually driving them getting through the session, but we'll see what happens on both. Let's talk about the appraisal bills that are out there as well. Now, we touched upon what happened with appraisal last summer in the discussion there. Some of the misconceptions, misinformation out there about how appraisal works or, quote, doesn't work. There's a bill out there by, again, Representative Clardy, that requires personal auto policies to have an appraisal procedure included in the bill itself. Now, right now, appraisal procedure is outlined in the policy. Generally, probably the same, because those companies that have them have to get them approved by TDI, but it's not a statutory mandate. It's a contractual right laid out in the policies themselves. So a little bit different approach. And we'll see what happens. This is the second or third time, as I recall, second time that language has been introduced at the lead. So we'll see what happens there. And then there is a broader bill, Angie, that puts appraisal in both homeowners and auto policies. I think that's Senator Zaffarini's bill. So that also bears watching. Because appraisal happens on the residential side as well. It's just a little bit different. But those disputes are typically fought out as part of litigation or in the court system. But we'll see where that heads as well. So some interesting ideas about how disputes should be resolved in auto, how they should be resolved in homeowners, and then just how repairs are done, particularly as we touched upon. Interesting at a time when you're having more accidents, more losses, and frankly, repairs are getting much more technical, requiring a lot more expertise as cars are increasingly loaded with all sorts of technologies. And you may recall we've heard the stories about what it now takes to repair a windshield or a bumper. It's much more complicated than it used to be. So
the margin of error is a little bit more specific.
Right. So I think body shops, whether they're independent or manufacturer shops, are already up to speed on what they need to do to make these repairs of these sophisticated systems. So we'll see what happens. I know, like I said, our members are uniquely interested, keenly interested in this, and want to see, how their businesses are going to be impacted as they deal with already a very tight auto market in terms of losses, shrinking profits, and just the slew of claims, whether it's hail here in Texas or floods here in Texas or Texans driving not very well, as you can tell, driving down I-35 oftentimes and having accidents. So that's kind of what I see. Did I miss anything, Angie?
No, I think that's the landscape, and I think that in a nutshell, we know that the trades are out there working and trying to educate people on these bills or the different components, because that's a lot of it. I think that when you were talking about too, that Clardy bill that says you can't have the least expensive part, there is a lot of confusion with least expensive and safety and what's safe and what's not, and then also what options are out there, when in fact I think we know we have a really competitive auto market and a very, very low complaint ratio. And so I think just a lot of education is happening.
I think that's a great point on when you look at complaints. And as I recall, the number, I think as
less than 1 point, like 0.000. Yeah.
Extremely small. I think TDI reported, and I'm looking at the number right now, 355 confirmed complaints related to auto in 2021. That's confirmed complaints. And you think about that, out of almost 29 million policies out there, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of claims paid. I think the industry generally does their jobs right, does it well. And that doesn't mean there's the occasional dispute over what claims losses are due or how a claim has been handled. And I know we've heard some testimony on when there is a total loss, even some disputes about what should be paid as the total loss amount. But generally, those can be resolved if you work with your carrier. And obviously, if need be, there's the avenue you have to go to court over a total loss claim to get the amount you think is due. But I think the system seems to work well, and we'll see what happens to these bills if they change anything about how those claims are handled, or about how appraisal is done, or even if you're gonna have to get an OEM part put in your car if it's under 36 months old. One thing I forgot to mention, you may have, but I can't recall, is that under that proposed bill, Senate Bill 1038, the consumer, the policyholder, does have the option to opt out of having an OEM part
Right.
used. But again, that adds something else for a consumer to figure out when they're buying the policy. And actually right now, there are companies out there that offer policies that you can state you want OEM parts, get an endorsement saying OEM parts if I have an accident. That's what I want used. So I think the market seems to be, as you put it, not only is it competitive, it's offering folks the opportunity, if they want that sort of coverage, to pay a little bit extra for it and get it. So we'll see what happens to these bills. I lost count of how many days in the session we are already, but we are at least 77, if I'm counting correctly. So we're over halfway there, and probably about, realistically, probably about a month left for hearings over in the House. Now, if you factor in things like, getting a bill out of committee, getting it on the calendars, it might be a little bit shorter, but time, believe it or not, seems like we just started. Time is already running out.
Yep, it's moving on through. And then as everybody tries to fit in everything in a couple of weeks, April's going to feel like 2 months. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So, okay. Well, this has been, if you're an insurance nerd or an auto insurance nerd, this has been fun to talk about and
Wish
kind
we
of
had
hear.
another pun, but you know.
I was trying to think of one, but I ran out after break and what's driving things. So I'm going to stop right there before I try to make a catalytic converter joke. So, Angie, I appreciate the
Yeah,
input. We'll keep our members updated. And thanks, Angie.
Yeah, I think
Thank
we'll
you.
yield. I think we'll yield here, and we'll hit the gas pedal on some of the new and upcoming podcasts that we have coming on. Really, thank you, Albert and Angie. Very informative. I think our members and listeners out there appreciate this. Some of the topics that we are going to come up with, though, as we move forward with more of these podcasts, is TWIA. Some of the bills that are working their way regarding TWIA. We'll probably focus on workers' compensation at some point, as well as privacy, fraud, and theft. There's a couple of bills that we'll be paying attention to that. So listen, pay attention when we post these podcasts, and there'll be more to come. Also, go check out insurancecouncil.org. That has all of your events, whether it's a webinar or our symposium. Our annual symposium is going to be in Dallas this year, July 12th through the 14th. And for that, I am Rich Johnson, Director of Communications for ICT. And for Angie and Albert, we will talk to you next time. Thank you very much. This has been a production of the Insurance Council of Texas, Austin, Texas. All rights reserved. Copyright 2023.